Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out Poisoner in Chief. Second chapter, we're going to begin. It's called Willing and Unwilling Subjects. Disorienting waves of dizziness enveloped Dr. Albert Hoffman during an experiment with ergot enzyme at the Sandoz Laboratory in Basel on April 16, 1943. He bicycled home with unusual difficulty, lay down, and closed his eyes. At first, he felt pleasantly inebriated. Then his imagination began to race. For the next 2 hours, he careened through what he later called an uninterrupted stream of fantastic images and extraordinary plasticity and vividness, accompanied by an intense kaleidoscopic play of colors. The ergot enzyme found naturally in fungus that grows on rye and other grains has been recognized for centuries as therapeutic, but it can also cause spasms and hallucinations. Hoffman, a research chemist, had been testing a new permutation that he hoped would improve blood circulation. When he woke the next morning, he suspected that ergot, which during the Middle Ages was associated with stories of witchcraft and possession, and had been the cause of intoxication. Yet the symptoms he had experienced did not match any ever recorded. He decided to conduct an experiment with himself as the subject. 3 days later, as his first experiments, he swallowed 250 micrograms of the substance he had been testing, a minute amount. Half an hour later, he wrote on his journal that he felt no trace of any effect. The next entry, is a scrawled note that trails off after the words difficulty in concentration, visual disturbances, marked desires to laugh. The experience, he wrote afterwards, was much stronger than the first time. I had great difficulty in speaking coherently. My field of vision swayed before me, and objects appeared distorted like images of curved mirrors. As far as I remember, the following were the almost outstanding symptoms: vertigo, visual disturbances. The faces of those around me appeared as grotesque, colored masks, marked motoric unrest, alternating with paralysis and intermittent heavy feeling in his head, limbs, and his entire body as if they were filled with lead. Dry, constricted sensation in the throat, feeling of choking, clear recognition of my condition, in which state I sometimes observed in the manner of an independent, neutral observer when I shouted half insanely or babbled incoherent words. Occasionally, I felt that I were out of my body. An unending series of colorful, very realistic, and fantastic images surged in upon me. At about 1 o'clock, I fell asleep and awoke the next morning feeling perfectly well. The chemical Hoffman ingested was the 25th in a series of lysergic and diethylamides he had compounded, and he named it LSD 25. During that spring week of 43, he became the first person ever to use it. Within a generation, it would shake the world. In the months after his first major inner voyages, only later would they be called acid trips, Hoffman tested LSD on volunteers drawn from among his colleagues at Sandoz. The results were astonishing. Hoffman reported that he called the extraordinary activities of LSD on the human psyche and concluded that it was by far the most active and most specific hallucinogen. The medical implications of this discovery were unclear. Hoffman thought LSD might open new avenues for research into the biochemical basis of mental illness. His experiments proceeded sporadically and inconclusively. News of them reached Washington, and by the end of 49, when an officer of the Chemical Corps reported to L. William Green, technical director of the Chemical and Radiological Laboratories at Edgewood Arsenal, The Sandoz chemist had discovered a new drug said to produce vivid hallucinations. Green was riveted. He collected all of the information he could find on the subject, then produced a long report entitled Psychochemical Warfare, a New Concept of War. It concluded with a strong recommendation that the government began systematically testing LSD, mescaline, and 60 other mind-altering compounds that might be weaponized for the use against the enemy populations. Their will be resist would be weakened greatly, not entirely destroyed by the mass hysteria and panic which would ensue. Green wrote, the symptoms which are considered to be of value in strategic and tactical operations, including the following fits of seizures, dizziness, fear, panic, hysteria, hallucinations, migraine, delirium, extreme depression, motions of hopelessness, lack of initiative to do even simple things, suicidal mania. Green proposed that America's military scientists be given a new mission. At the outer edge of imagination, he suggested beyond artillery and tanks, beyond chemicals, beyond germs, beyond even nuclear bombs, might lie an unimagined cosmos of new weaponry, psychoactive drugs. Green believed that they should usher in a new era of humane warfare. Throughout recorded history, wars have been characterized by death, human misery, and the destruction of property, each major conflict being more catastrophic than the one preceding it. He wrote in his report, I am convinced that it is possible by means of the techniques of psychochemical warfare to conquer the enemy without wholesale killing of his people and the mass destruction of his property. This report electrified the new American officials allowed to read it. Among them were the Director of Central Intelligence, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter. Seized by its revelations, he asked President Truman to authorize the drug research Green proposed and gave the job to the CIA. Truman agreed. Hillenbacher assigned a handful of CIA officers to begin working with Special Operations Divisions at Camp Detrick. Under this informal agreement, which took shape during the 50s, two of the most secret covert teams in U.S. American became partners. Military chemists at Detrick could design and control and concoct all manner of drug combination, but had no authority to use them in operations. The CIA, by contrast, is an action agency. Officers in the technical services staff, which produced the tools of espionage, were looking for drugs that could be used to loosen tongues, weaken human resistance, open the mind and outside control, or kill people. Under the informal agreement, the scientists who made psychoactive and convulsive drugs began working with CIA interrogators when applied them to prisoners. The joint program, later codenamed MK Naomi, the prefix MK was the projects run by the technical services staff, was given an immediate shot of cash. Under MK Naomi, according to one investigator, the SOD men developed a whole arsenal of toxic substances for CIA use. If agency operators needed to kill someone in a few seconds with, say, a suicide pill, SOD providers super deadly shellfish toxin, more useful for assassination. CIA and SOD men decided was botulinum. With the incubation period of 8 to 12 hours, it allowed the killer to separate himself from the dead. When CIA officers were merely wanted to be rid of somebody temporarily, SOD stockpiled for them about a dozen diseases and toxins of various strengths. Besides working in their laboratories at Camp Detrick, scientists engage in MK Naomi, carrying out field tests and learn how biological agents might work in crowded environments. Some observed biological weapons conducted by the British military included one near the Caribbean island in Antigua in 49, during which hundreds of animals died. The same year, 6 members of the Special Operations Division entered the Pentagon pretending to be air quality monitors and sprayed mock bacteria into air ducts. Afterward, they calculated that at their attacks had been real, at least half or three working in the building would have been died. Since some of these scientists were researching biowarfare, how to wage it and how to defend against it. They wanted to learn how pathogens could be spread in a concentrated population and what the effects of such an agent would be. In 1950, they decided to carry out a large-scale outdoor test in which harmless and traceable germs would be released into the air at a large American city. They chose San Francisco, not only because of its coastline and tall buildings, but also because its chronic fog would disguise germ clouds. The U.S. Navy supplied a minesweeper specifically equipped with large arsenal hoses. Operation Sea Spray, as it was called, was classified as a military maneuver. Local officials were not notified. For 6 days at the end of September, as their minesweepers drifted near San Francisco, scientists from Camp Dietrich directed the spraying of the bacterium called Serenatia metacericens into the coastal mist. They had chosen the substance because it had red tint, made it easy to trace, and was not known to cause any ill effects. According to the samples taken afterwards at 43 sites, the spraying reached all of San Francisco's 800,000 residents and also affected people in Oakland, Berkeley, Sausalito, and 5 other cities. Over the next couple of weeks, 11 people checked into the hospital with urinary tract infections and were found to have red drops in their urine. One of them, who was recovering from prostate surgery, died. Doctors were mystified. Several of them later published a journal article reporting that the curious clinical observation for which they could find no explanation. Although the Serenata marcianensis bacterium turned out not to have been as harmless as scientists from Camp Dietrich had believed, they deemed their vulnerability test a success. It was conducted without detection and, by their reckoning, proved that cities were vulnerable to biological warfare. It was noticed that the successful BW attack on this area can be launched from the sea. They wrote in their report that the effective dosages can be produced over relatively large areas. The CIA played only an observer's role in Operation Sea Spray. Full-scale warfare was not its business. Its officers were more interested in the ways that chemical and biological agents could be used to control the minds of individuals. In 1950, director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Roscoe Hillenkotter, took the next step in the search. He decreed creation of a new program that would take the CIA's quest for mind control techniques into the next level. The program was codenamed Bluebird, supposedly after someone at a planning meeting described its goal as finding ways to make prisoners sing like a bird. One of the first Bluebird memos described that experience be broad and comprehensive, involving both domestic and overseas activities. Another note that the best subjects could be prisoners, including defectors, refugees, POWs, and others. Experiments would be aimed at, according to a third memo, investigating the possibility of control an individual by application of special interrogation techniques. Bluebird began amid great enthusiasm. Barely 6 months after it was launched, its officers asked permission to expand it, including the establishment and training of 4 additional teams, besides the 2 currently in use. These teams, they said, would conduct experiments and develop techniques to determine the possibilities and practicability of the positive use of special interrogation on willing and unwilling subjects for operational purposes. Positive use of SI would be for the purpose of operational control of individuals to perform specific tasks under hyper-hypnotic suggestion. This field, as it is found that the application of SI is possible and practicable, offers unlimited possibilities to operational officers. Around the time that report was written, a faithful change transformed the CIA. A new director, General Walter Bedell Smith, took over in October 1950. One of his first decisions was to hire the ambitious former OSS spy master Alan Dulles, who we talked about in our last book, didn't we? Although Dulles was in many ways a limited thinker, he liked to imagine himself on the cutting edge of espionage. During his war years in Switzerland, he had met and come to admire the psychoanalyst Carl Jung. By the time he began his long career at the CIA, he had become fascinated with the prospect that science would discover ways to manipulate the human psyche. After 6 weeks at work at the CIA as his consultant, Dulles officially joined the Army on January 2nd, 1951. That's like a month and a half before Stephen was born. His title, Deputy Director for Plans, lightly disguised the fact that his job was to oversee the agency's covert operations, an enterprise that consumed most of its budget. From the beginning of the CIA career to the end, Dulles enthusiastically promoted mind control projects of every sort. He saw them as an indispensable part of the secret war against communism that he was charged with waging. Signs that escalated war were plain to see. Less than a month after Dulles began full-time work at the CIA, the United States carried out its first nuclear test in the Nevada desert, giving Americans a terrifying look at the mushroom cloud that they had been told could engulf them at any moment. Soon afterwards, 11 leaders of the Communist Party of the United States were ordered to prison after the Supreme Court upheld their convictions on charges on seeking and overthrowing the government. Adding to those shocks was jarring news that two British intelligence officers, Gary Burgess and Donald McLean, had disappeared. They had been feeding Western secrets to the United Nations for years and later turned up in Moscow. These frightening developments intensified the sense of barely controlled panic that shaped the early CIA. Alan Dulles immediately focused on Bluebird. He had been on the job for only a few weeks when he sent a revealing memo to two of the senior officers he had assigned to help direct it, Frank Wisner and Richard Helms, like Helms Bakery. In our conversation on February 9th, 1951, Dulles wrote, I outlined to you the possibilities of augmenting the usual interrogation methods by the use of drugs, hypnosis, shock, etc., and emphasized the defensive aspects as well as the offensive opportunities in this field of applied medical science. The enclosed folder, Interrogation Techniques, was prepared by my medical division to provide you with a suitable background. Dulles added that his augmenting could only be carried out overseas because many of its aspects were not permitted by the United States governments, i.e., anthrax, etc. Other mentions from this period contain equally revealing passages. One stipulates Bluebird teams are to include persons qualified in medicine, psychological interrogation, the use of electrosonograph, electric shock, and the polygraph. Another, direct research to investigate ways that a person can be made to commit acts useful to us under post-hypnotic suggestion, and with the ways to condemn our own people, that they will not be subject to post-hypnotic suggestion. The third asks, can a person under hypnosis be forced to commit murder? We'll just keep reading on tomorrow about Alan Dulles, who's the head of ex-OSS operator that they put in charge of the CIA and the Warren Commission, the people that murdered the president. Can't say murder on this channel, so we say unalived. This guy unalived the president, and on and on and on. So we pray for all the families and friends, and I would love to earn your subscription if you think I'm telling any truth here. Have a good day.